Hello, my name is Mike, and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is 4/23/23, and Shepard of the Hills is my home group. Forgive me for this. I wasn't expecting to introduce my friend Slow Will. Many of you know Slow Will got his name Slow because it took him 5 years of being in the program before he worked his steps. And he can tell you, he can attest to that. He went to jail several times. But one thing I do know personally about Will is when I came in here 6 years ago, Will gave me my first 12 and 12 book. And I still have that book today. And, I had to go on an adventure back out there, and I came back in, I still have that book. And he still had that hand stuck out, shaking it, and welcomed me back in here. In 45 years of sobriety, I've heard that to keep it that long, you have to do the service work and be helping others and things like that to maintain our sobriety. And I see Will doing that all the time. I don't know anyone in here that hits as many meetings as this man does, and has his hand out and his phone number out for as many people. It's just a blessing to call this man a friend of mine. And I'm sure several of you have met him. But I want to introduce you to Mr. Slow Will.
Thank you, brother. I'm Slow Will, alcoholic. Sobriety date is 1/1/80, and my home group is the Shepard of the Hills group. All of them, not just one. And a little bit about what happened, what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. What it used to be like was miserable.
Amen.
It started out. I don't want to go back too far in my history, but it started out October 2nd, 1954. When I was born. And I was 10 pounds 9 ounces. I was born in Alameda Hospital in Oakland, California. And I was a little heavy, happy baby. And then we jump up 5 months later, and I was given my last rites in the same hospital because I was dying. I was down to a little over 5 pounds and couldn't keep anything down. And back then there wasn't as much medical stuff as there is now, 71 years later. And this old doctor from out in the woods someplace told my mom and dad, you either need to give him goat's milk or give him some beer with his bottle every night. And because they needed to build up my enzymes. I was dying of an enzyme deficiency. Everything I ate went straight through me. And so my dad liked beer. My dad didn't know anything about goat's milk or where to find goat's milk in Oakland, California. So they started giving me a little bit of beer every night, and I started putting on weight immediately. And I haven't stopped. You can tell by the spaghetti plate that I had 2 of tonight. And I say that not because that didn't cause me to be an alcoholic. What caused me to be an alcoholic was my actions in my later years when I started drinking excessively because I found out, alcohol in my early drinking caused me to be somebody. I started drinking alcoholically, I think, at about the age of 11. I got drunk in public and thrown in jail at 11 years of age in a drunk tank in San Dimas, California. And it was rough being that young in a drunk tank with 3 or 4 older guys. And I was throwing up all over the place. And the sheriff called my mom up and they says, "Mrs. Kessler, do you have a son named Willoughby?" And she says, "Yes." And they says, "No, you don't. We have him now, San Dimas Sheriff Substation." And they hung up on her. They didn't realize how long it would only take her to get a block because we lived a block away from the sheriff's station. And, the smoke hadn't settled down on the phone call. and she come walking through the door and she just lit into the desk sergeant. You miserable SOB. What the hell do you think you're doing? Don't you ever hang up on me. She wasn't caring about her 11-year-old drunk in the drunk tank. She was lit anyways. She was so drunk she had to drive from the house to the sheriff's station because she couldn't walk that far. And she lit into him, and he says, Mrs. Kessler, just take your son and go home. And so we got home, and I went into the bathtub, and I needed to take a bath because I had vomit all over me from sitting and from throwing up on myself. When they picked me up, a little quick story about when they picked me up for that drunk is me and a bunch of my friends, we told our moms we were going over to another friend's house to listen to records, because that's what people did in the 60s. So I took 3 or 4 of the albums out of the little room in the corner of our house and went over to my friend's house. And we left all the albums there and we went over to the town drunk, Tom, and we asked Tom to go down and get us something to drink. Well, he said, yeah, you buy a bottle of wine for me, I'll get you something to drink. So I said, well, get me a bottle of wine that you're drinking and get us a 6-pack of beer, because only 4 of us or 5 of us, and we're going to go get drunk. Well, he brought me a half-gallon bottle of Bally High wine. All us kids got together and gave him about $5 or $10. Half-gallon bottle of Bally High wine, which is the fruitiest, nastiest stuff you can drink, next to Morgan David, Mad Dog, and Colt 45 beer. And one of the strongest beers you could drink at the time. And so us, a whole group of kids, went down to over the railroad tracks and into the orange grove at the end of the cul-de-sac that I live on. I'm doing all this, 5 houses from my house. And so we all got in the orange grove and we started drinking, and we just got drunk. I found out when they're talking about at 11, I found out that mixed drinks don't mean beer and wine together. Mixed drinks are like vodka and orange juice and stuff like that. But you add beer and wine, that doesn't settle too well. And so we got done with our partying and stuff, and we picked up this big long metal fence post, and here's 5 or 6 drunk kids walking down the middle of the street singing, 99 bottles of beer on the wall, or How Dry I Am, or some crap that my dad used to sing. And I'm about 2 houses now away from being home. And all of a sudden, here comes a squad car in front of me, and another one comes around from the cul-de-sac behind me. And I look on both sides of me, and I'm the only one in the middle of the road holding this pole. And they turned around and they didn't ask any questions. They just grabbed me and threw me in the back of the cop car. And I'm drunk as could be. And they threw me in the back of the cop car, and I got to go up Gladstone Hill in San Dimas. We got on Gladstone Hill, and I told this cop I was sick. He needed to pull over because I needed to throw up. He says, oh, you're just drunk.
Oh, no.
I says, no, I'm sick. And I'm sitting in the back of the cop car, 11 years old, no handcuffs, nothing. He said, no, you're just drunk. And as I leaned forward to tell him, no, I'm sick, I threw up. Projectile vomiting of wine and beer over the front seat, onto the front seat, onto the cop, onto the radio, you name it. And, he was mad. He was mad. We got down to the jail, and he just drugged me damn near by my hair, into the jail cell. And he told the desk sergeant, he said, just throw him in there with the big guys. And he threw me in there with the big guys. And it was like, when I got out, he told me, he says, don't ever come to my jail again. And I says, dude, I won't. We moved out of town about 6 months later, just to avoid, people that wanted my mom and dad to pay the bills. That's the type upbringing I had was, don't pay your bills. Just stay there till your rent runs out and move to another city or another city. We went from Covina to West Covina to San Dimas to Pomona, back over to San Dimas, back over to Pomona, and they were real good at just avoiding the bill collector. I mean, we got a gas bill one time for Charles Carlton. Yeah, that was my mom's name, Charles Carlton. And she didn't pay that bill either. We moved back over to Pomona. But you know, I was always getting in trouble for my drinking. And you know, I was about 15, maybe 16 when I met my brother-in-law that lives in Florida, and I drank with him. You know, and he took me from my next to my last drunk. You know, I'll move all the way up to my next to the last drunk, because everybody knows how to get drunk. Everybody knows. You know, it was starting to not work for me. It was starting to work against me. Alcohol was. And he come by my apartment or my condo at the time, and he says, "Let's go out and get drunk." And I said, "Okay." He says, "We're going to get Florida drunk." I said, "Well, how do you get Florida drunk?" He says, "Well, we get a gallon of vodka and a gallon of orange juice. And we go driving around, and every mile we take a shot of vodka and chase it with a shot of orange juice." Makes sense. And I found out that guy can drink half a gallon of vodka and never begin to get drunk. But I was drunk. And I remembered coming into the condo, and my girlfriend was in the bedroom, and I crawled down the hallway crying and throwing up, hugging the bathroom, hugging the toilet. And you know, that was when I was first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, because she says, "Well, maybe you should think about going to AA." And she had heard about it from one of her ex-husbands or something. And I said, "No, I don't think I need that." You know, I was young. I was 15, 16 years old. No, I wasn't. Not at that time. At that time, I was already 22, because I was out of the Marine Corps. I went into the Marine Corps. I drank my way through 4 years of the Marine Corps. I went into private. I've got Lance Corporal E3 patches on my sleeve here. They took them off like 2 days before I got out of the service. I was demoted to private. Reason my DD 214 says E3 was because a friend of mine was a drinker, and he wanted to party that weekend, and he's in there typing at his typewriter on his desk. I said, "What you doing?" He says, "Your paperwork." I says, "Oh, when you get to my rank, it's E3. I got $50. And he turns around and he says, "Okay, you're a Lance Corporal again." And he typed it in there. I gave him 50 so he could go out and party for the weekend. So my sleeve said E1. My DD 214 to this day it says E3. So I was good with that, you know. But I got out of the Marine Corps, and I was 21 years of age, you know, and I went to work for a Latterman State Hospital, which is where my mom and dad both worked. And you know, working for the state, it's hard to get fired. But I needed time for the weekends to get longer, so I killed off everyone in my family. I'd call them up and I'd say, "Well, my uncle died, and I need to take 3 days off to go to his funeral. You know, my grandmother died, but they were all still alive. But I'd get good and drunk, and I decided I didn't want to go to work, and I made a mistake, and I called them up and I says, "I won't be in tonight, my mom died." They posted it in our weekly newsletter at the hospital, you know, condolences to Ken Kessler and his son Willoughby because Phyllis's death. And somebody on my mom's unit showed her that.
Oh no.
And she turns around and she goes, "Why are you killing us off?" I says, "Well, because I need time off to go drink." And she said, "Why don't you just quit your job and go drink?" Good idea. Quit a state job to go drink. You know, so I quit the state of California, and I started traveling around the country, hitchhiking back and forth from North Carolina to California to Florida and back to North Carolina and back to California. And I hitchhiked cross country for about 3 more years. And I got back to California, and I was living in a travel trailer in my mom's driveway, and it was 1970. I moved in that travel trailer in 1970. and I drank, and I would wear my clothes till they offended me, and then I would put them in a trash bag, and I'd put on the next clothes, and then when I started running low on clothes, I'd go to the Goodwill and I'd get 4 or 5 more sets of clothes. Never washed them, just threw them in a trash bag and set them out in the trash can, because that's just the way I was. I was a nasty, stinky, smelly young kid that just really didn't give a rat's ass. And I lived in that travel trailer, 14-foot travel trailer, for 2 years. Only time I could go in the house is if Mom or Dad were there, and they would let me go into the bathroom, and once in a while I could go in once a week and take a shower. And I had to make sure that enough of the booze bottles were out of the trailer that Mom could come in and clean my sheets and stuff about once every 2 weeks or so. And I was okay with living that way. And I went to a friend's house. I rode a stolen bicycle from my neighbor's house to a friend's house in Laverne, California. And I was coming down like July 7th or something, and I was coming down White Avenue on this stolen bicycle. I'd just left his house, middle of July, and it's hotter than hell, and I'm coming down White Avenue, and I looked over, and one of the few clubs that I hadn't been thrown out of in Pomona, and there was a lot of them on Mission Boulevard, on Holt Boulevard. They were full of bars and clubs and little dives, and I look over to as I'm riding down the road, I look over and I'm going, the Triangle Club. I'll go in and get me a beer there. I had like 50 cents on me. I can get a draft. You could get a draft in 1980 for 50 cents or 79. And I walked in there and I looked at this girl behind the counter and I says, can I get a draft? I got 50 cents. And she says, we don't sell beer here. I said, well, 50 cents buy a mixed drink? And she says, no. She says, but we'll give you a soda or a coffee or whatever you want to drink that we do have. And this old guy sitting over at the counter, he turns around to me and he goes, I'll buy you a soda. I'll buy you a sandwich if you want one. Sit down and let me tell you about our club. And I sat down and I was eating a sandwich and drinking a cold Dr. Pepper, Verner's ginger ale at the time. That was my ginger ale of choice. And so I'm sitting there drinking the ginger ale and I'm eating a sandwich, and he's telling me all about this AA stuff and the Triangle Club and what it does for people. And after about 45 minutes of being 12-stepped, I looked at him and I said, well, this club's just fine for you, but I don't think I need it. And I got on that stolen bicycle and I finished the ride. I stole this bicycle like every other day, because I'd take it from over his fence and I'd ride it to wherever I had to ride it to, and I'd bring it back and I'd set it back over his fence. And he knew I was taking his bicycle, but I still like to, think that, I was stealing it if the police caught me. And the police weren't looking for me. I wasn't as big a criminal as I thought I was. I had gone to jail a lot in my drinking for traffic warrants. I went to jail one time for DWI, and it was changed to careless and reckless because I plea bargained it down. And I found out why at a later date was because in Hermosa Beach, or in Huntington Beach, California, drinking and driving, DWI, at that time in 1970 it was 75 I got out of the Marine Corps. It was 76 or 77. A DWI would have costed me $60. Careless and reckless fine was $165. So they'd plea bargain you down so you didn't have a DUI on your record, but you'd pay twice as much for not having that on there. And so I took it, which I was glad I did, because it didn't stop me from future things that I did. And but all the times I went to jail was for traffic warrants. Parking tickets, speeding tickets, unsafe lane change, running red lights, that kind of stuff. I went to jail twice maybe for drunk in public, because I would get pulled over and I would be drunk, and they would get out and they'd give me a sobriety test, and I'd walk their straight line and stand there and lean back and touch my nose and do whatever they wanted me to do. And one cop one time in San Dimas, he says, I passed his sobriety test, I got in my car, I drove away, I went to McDonald's. 5 minutes later, I'm out there drunk fighting with some guy in the parking lot. Both our shirts are off. We're standing there just smacking each other around, and this cop comes up and he looks at me and he looks at this other partner of his over there and he goes, "This guy was sober 5 minutes ago. And I'm staggering around drunk." And he just looks at me and he goes, "I got a question for you two." And I says, "What's that?" And he says, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "What do you mean, what are we doing?" And he says, "Guys only take their shirts off for two reasons. To fight or to screw." And I turned around and I said, "Well, we're going to fight. We're not going to screw." And he said, "Okay, finish it." So we had a little fight, and everybody walked back to their cars and left. But anyways, I get back to the middle of July when I was introduced to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was fine, but I had to drink for another 6 months, from July through December. And mid-December 1979, I thought, I'm done with this. And I called my sister up. She worked at a pizza place in Diamond Bar, and I lived in Pomona in my mom's driveway still. And I called my sister up and I says, Esther, I says, "I need some help." She says, "Well, come up and get me and we'll go sit down and drink some coffee and talk about it." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Wait, you've been drinking?" And I said, "Yeah." She says, "I'll leave the job now and I'll come down and pick you up and we'll go talk about it." So she left the job, she came down. I told her about the AA club that I found out about. And so she turned around and she came down and picked me up, and we went from Pomona 18 miles away to Denny's in Glendora. Open 24 hours. So we went to Denny's, and I'd been crying all the way over there. I was tired of the drinking. And I walked in with her, and I walked over to the phone book, and I opened the phone book up. For you people that are relatively young, a phone book was a big fat thing about this big with about 700 pages. Half of them were yellow and the rest of them were white. And I opened it up to the yellow pages, and the first page of the yellow page, I saw AA. And I thought, and I just tore the whole page out and folded it up and stuck it in my pocket, because I'm going to find out about this AA stuff. And so I sat there and I talked to my sister that night for an hour or so. And then we turned around and we went home. The next day I called up AA. And I says, "Do you have meetings today?" And they said, "Yes, we have meetings today and tonight and this morning." And I said, "Well, I'll probably come over for the noon meeting." They said, "Well, we can send somebody over to get you if you're too drunk." And I said, "Nah, I'm a little hungover, but I'm okay right now." And they turned around and they said, "Okay, well, we'll hope to see you at noon." So I went to the Triangle Club for a noon meeting, mid-December 1979. And it was great. I walked in and everybody's, handing me coffee and offering me cookies and giving me handshakes and hugs. And, these girls that I don't even know are coming up and giving me hugs, And here I am, 25 years old. I'm about this tall. I have a big afro, and I'm about 170 pounds. And these girls are coming up and giving me hugs. I'm thinking, they must like me. They want me. I'm that good. And I can show you a picture after this meeting on my phone. I wasn't that good. And but then everybody's laughing and smiling and keep coming back and all this, and I'm thinking, they all got these coffee cups in their hand. It's got to be in the coffee. Got to be in the coffee. You don't ever see people in AA they got a coffee cup in their hand and they're happy. So whatever it is, Folgers is doing it right. So I went to meetings. And I heard people say stuff like, "Keep coming back no matter what." That was a good one. I like that one. And but they were saying stuff like get a sponsor. I talked to a couple people to find out what sponsorship was about, because when I heard somebody say you need to get a sponsor, I thought, yeah, I'm driving a beat up little car that it could use new tires and some brakes. Maybe I'll get a sponsor that can get me some tires and brakes on this freaking car, and help pay for my gas to get to and from meetings. That's what sponsorship does. I'd hung around race cars long enough, and going to the drags enough and saw all the decals on the cars. Put as many decals on you. I had a 79 Datsun F10 station wagon, the smallest station wagon ever made. And this comes into plan in just a few minutes, because I got this smallest station wagon ever made. Seats, one in the front bucket seat, one in the other front bucket seat, two in the back seat, and there's enough room barely in the back for an ice chest. They were small, and they only made them 2 years. And so I was going to meetings, and a lot of meetings, 3 a day, and people were giving me hugs every time I walk in. Hey, Will, you made it back. You're on day 4. You're on day 6. Keep coming back. It works if you work it. And they're telling me all these AA slogans. And yeah, that's fine. And I had a big book and didn't read it. My big book was like Mike's 12 and 12. You open it up and it creaks. But it was like that when I was 5 years sober. You'd open it up and it'd creak, because I never got into the big book. I didn't go to big book studies, once in a while, but so I kept going to meetings and everything, the Friday night dances and the potlucks and the birthday meetings, and all my friends, I quit seeing them. You need to give up all your playgrounds and your playmates, and so I did. No problem. I walked away from all the dope fiends and alcoholics I hung out, and going to all these meetings and got these new friends and stuff. And a friend of mine called me up, and it was New Year's Eve, and he turns around and he says, or New Year's Eve day, and he says, Will, he says, you want to go to the Rose Parade? I said, yeah, I've never seen the Rose Parade sober. I don't remember it drunk, but I know I was there. But I've never seen the Rose Parade sober. I said, so yeah, I'll go with you. He says, fine. He says, pick us all up over here at Ed's house. And I thought, all us up over at Ed's house? In my car? Okay, we're going to try this. So I went over New Year's Eve day and I picked up 6 guys in my little Datsun that holds 4 comfortably. And an ice chest. And we're going down the 210 freeway, 57 freeway towards the 210 freeway towards Pasadena. And as we're going down the 210 or the 57 freeway, a friend of mine hands me this little thing that's about as big as this recorder here. And it's a little wooden pipe. It's got a little slide on it right here, and he slides it open and takes a pinch out of the bowl, out of the pipe, and he puts it in the bowl and he closes it up and he fires it up and he says, here. I said, I don't do drugs. He says, not a drug. He says, try it. He says, you don't like marijuana that much. Try it now that you're sober. And I thought, okay, well, 1 or 2 hits. And I smoked that bowl, and then I smoked another bowl. And then I turned around and I said, I need something to sip on. I didn't tell him I needed something to drink. I said, I need something to sip on. And they turned around and he handed me an ice cold can of Budweiser. And I looked at it and I said, now we're going to have to stop at the store. I said, I can't drink beer. I says, got to stop and get me something to drink. And all of a sudden I see this guy reach back in the ice chest and he pulls out this ice cold bottle of Bacardi 151 rum. And here I am hiring a son of a bitch, and he hands me that bottle of Bacardi 151 rum. And I said, well, it's only a couple weeks, it don't matter. I opened that bottle up, and I just tipped it up and started chug-a-lugging it. And I know that I had some pills. I don't know what they were. I don't remember much of the night. I lost my car twice. I got into a couple fights because I had a black eye and a split lip. And there was a couple tickets in the glove compartment of the car. So only reason I found out what I did was because I called up one of the guys that was with me, and I said, dude, I said, what happened? He said, well, you lost your car, you got in a fight. And I said, well, how'd I find my car? He says, well, you went up and asked this guy at a parking lot, an attendant at a parking lot, how to find your car. And he said, well, you look at the ticket for where you parked it, because all parking lots gave you a ticket. I didn't know that. I looked in my pocket, and there was a little ticket, and I held it out, and he says, well, that's in here somewhere. So we went and we found my car. I made it home that night at about 11:30 at night. And the reason I know that is because my mom says, I says, well, what happened? She says, you came in last night at about 11:30, you turned the TV on, you giggled for about 30 seconds, and you fell over backwards. And this is New Year's morning I woke up, and she told me that. I woke up watching the Rose Parade on TV. I was supposed to be down there watching it in person. You know, and I didn't know if any of my friends made it home safely. I had to go out and take a look at my car to make sure there was no dents, no damage, no anything, you know, wrong with my car. So I told my mom, I said, I gotta go back to a meeting. You know, and I come stumbling, staggering, crawling back through the doors at the Triangle Club, and nobody looked at me and said, I had a rough one, huh? Nobody said anything about it. They just turned around and says, well, welcome back. Welcome back. My coffee cup was still hanging on the wall. My dues were still paid up. One of the guys grabbed my cup and gave me a nice cup of black coffee, and sat down and I went to a meeting. You know, and that was January 1st, 1980. And from January 1st, 1980, I would like to say it was all peaches and cream, that I haven't had a bad day since.
Yeah, right.
But that would be a lie, because I didn't work the program for my first 5 years. I just kept coming back. I kept going to the functions. I rode with the Clean and Sober Motorcycle Club. I did everything that everybody else in AA does except for work the steps. You know, I got married. My first AA birthday present was a brand new baby girl. You know, and she'll be 45 years old this year, January 2nd. That's amazing. But you know, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous allowed me to do what I needed to do. They said, get a sponsor, read the book, work the steps. I didn't get a sponsor, I didn't read the book, I didn't work the steps. I did things my way. I did part of step 1, I did a lot of 13th stepping. You know, rode with the club, because that way I could put a vest on and be a big ass biker. You know, 26 years of age, 25 years of age. And the only requirement we had for the membership of the motorcycle club, stay sober. You know, so I went to jail 10 times in my first 5 years of sobriety. Never drank over it, never drank because of it. Never got drunk and got in jail. But I was still doing the same stupid shit that I was doing when I was out there drinking and using. It just wasn't drinking and using. I was still lying, cheating, and stealing. I was still, you know, getting tickets and not paying them. Getting traffic warrants and going to jail for the traffic warrants. And I did that for 5 years. And I was 5 years sober on my 5th AA birthday. I'm in San Bernardino County Jail. And I'm sitting there in San Bernardino County Jail, and I'm 5 years sober, wondering, where's all my friends to help me celebrate my 5th AA birthday? And all my friends were out there working a program and enjoying sobriety. And I got released January 1st, 1985. And when I walked out through the doors at San Bernardino County Jail, here's this young guy, 2 years sober, I'm 5 years sober, and he walks up and he goes, I'm John. I says, I know who you are, you ride in the same club I do. He says, and I'm your sponsor. And And I said, what are you talking about? You're my sponsor. And he turns around and he says, I'm John, I'm your sponsor. The president says, you need a sponsor that'll walk you through the steps the way they're laid out in the big book. He says, so I'll walk you through the steps the way they're laid out in the big book, the way my sponsor did it with me. And I said, okay, let's do this thing. I was done. I was ready. I had actually done the first step of recovery. On page 30 of the big book, it says we must fully concede to our innermost selves that we're alcoholic. I've been lying to every one of you for 5 years because I told y'all I was an alcoholic and you believed it. But I hadn't convinced myself I was an alcoholic. And I hadn't conceded to myself. Once I conceded to myself that I'm an alcoholic, then I wasn't lying to you anymore because I knew that I was. And that's when I had like my first spiritual awakening. And he sat down with me for 14 days. 14 days and 14 nights with the big book, working the steps the way they're laid out in the big book. And when we got done with step 9 and we got to step 10, he turns around and he says, now, we've got the hard stuff out of the way. We've done steps 1 through 9. And I said, okay. I said, when do we start on 10? He says, you've been working 10 for quite a long time now. He says, what you need to do is you need to do 10, 11, and 12 every day for the rest of your life if you want to maintain sanity, serenity, and peace of mind. And from that time on, I haven't had a bad day in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Amen.
Haven't had a bad day in over 41 years. Now I do have bad moments. I had a daughter and a friend of mine from Branson here. They died on the same night one night when I was here for bingo. And all I could do was pray for them. And my friend died. I finished bingo that night. I went home. I was praying for him. I was smoking a cigar. My daughter calls me up and says, Will, are you sitting down? I says, yeah. They says, Sarah's dead. She says, Sarah's dead. And I'm going, what? Yeah, they just found her dead on the floor of the bathroom in the house that she was staying at, two doors down from her brother. She passed out on the floor and died from alcoholism. I'd offered to, get her a room at the Simmering Center and pay for her monthly rent or whatever it is over at the Simmering Center. She didn't want that. She wasn't done drinking. 3 days before her 44th birthday, she was done drinking, because alcohol killed her. And next day, I was here at the club at a meeting, Sunday. I was here at the 7 o'clock Sunday meeting that week, because that's what I do. I go to meetings and I call people and I talk to people. People, had somebody call me up today, you going to the meeting tonight? I said, well, yeah, I think I'm speaking. And he says, can I get a ride from you? And I said, well, yeah, I guess I can give you a ride. I just had to take a shower earlier and put my cigar away earlier. But I said, yeah, I guess I'll give you. And I was getting a little irritated because my GPS on my phone wasn't working. So I was getting lost. I had to call him up. Where you live? Right behind Dolly Parton Stanford. Okay, finally found him, and we got to the meeting 2 hours early. Or an hour, 2 hours early. But that's the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And life has been great. Life has really been great. I've got 2 kids that are mine by blood. I've got 6 kids that are stepkids. So I've got 8 kids altogether. I've got 13 grandkids and 3 great-grandkids that have never seen me drink or use. Never seen me drink or use. When I went and I've had five bouts with cancer. When I went in, they took my lung out. They gave me some pain pills and sent me home from the hospital. Yeah, I tried them things. They didn't work out too well, because my memory doesn't work right too well when I'm in pain. So I took a pain pill. And the pain was starting to subside, but I couldn't remember if I took a pain pill when it was bedtime, so I took another pain pill. And And I laid in bed all night long with a tube hanging out my side, itching and scratching because I wasn't used to these painkillers. I called my sponsor up and I said, dude, come get these fucking things. Excuse my language. I said, come get these things. I says, and if I need one, I will call you up in the middle of the night and I will drive to your house to get one. And then I know I'm serious. Otherwise, I'm going to live off of Tylenol. You know, and that's what I took for pain after lung surgery. They cut me from the middle of my back to my chest, broke 2 ribs and pulled my whole left lung out and said, you can go home now. 3 days later, you know, they did stuff. They cut me from the top of my ear all the way down my neck. Took a golf ball sized growth off my carotid artery or whatever arteries over on this side, you know, and walked into an AA meeting Wednesday night, men's stag, Pomona, California, with this tube hanging out my neck, plastic bag taped to my chest to collect all the fluids that are draining out of it. They said, what are you doing here? I says, I needed a meeting. You know, so I did that because AA means everything to me. AA is my life. You know, without Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't think I'd have made it to 30 years of age. You know, and I just went out with a bunch of people after the meeting last night and celebrated my 71st birthday. You know, I didn't plan on doing that. That was not planned. You know, I was of the old school, you know, live fast, die young, and leave a good-looking corpse. Well, the corpse wasn't all that good-looking, but you know, I was still living fast to die young, and it didn't work out. You know, but the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, they told me get a sponsor. I got a sponsor. You know, they told me read the big book. I read the big book. Work the steps. I worked the steps. You know, there's a few things I found in the big book that I really like, and I'll point them out. Right now on page 132 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, on line 17, there's 10 words on that line. And the 6 words in the middle say, we absolutely insist on enjoying life. And I was fine with that until some newcomer screwed me up. And he turns around and he says, you got that sentence down, don't you, Will? And I said, yeah. He says, okay. He says, there's 2 words on each end of that to make them 10 words. He says, read the first 2 words. And I read them, and it says, wanted. I thought, what a fucking concept. I've got to want it. And then at the last 2 words, it says, we try. Doesn't say I try. Doesn't say you can try for me. It says we try. Working my steps by myself never got me anything. Working my steps with a sponsor got me sobriety, got me sanity, got me peace of mind. You know, I don't allow negativity in my life today. I don't allow it in my life today. I don't like negativity. It's not allowed on my property. You know, if you want to come up banging on my door and hooting and hollering and yelling shit about the neighbor, no. You know, I will call 911. Get off my property, negativity. You know, I don't want you around. You know, and another one of my favorite lines is the next page over on page 133. First paragraph in the middle of page 1, on page 133. It said, we are sure that God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. You know, enjoying life and being happy, joyous, and free. That's 4 positives right there. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is full of nothing but positive things. There's nothing negative in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you think there is, prove me wrong. Had one newcomer come up to me one time. He says, well, I'll prove you wrong. Right here in the big book it says, you know, if you don't think you're an alcoholic, step over to the nearest bar and try some controlled drinking. I says, absolutely right. Yep. Absolutely right. There's nothing wrong with you trying. If you don't believe you're an alcoholic, we don't want to screw up your good times. So go out there and finish your good times and come back when you're ready, like I did. You know, and he says, well, you got a point there. I said, no, the big book has the point. You know, there's nothing negative in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I've tried. I rewrote the big book. You know, I rewrote it when I got sober. Nobody wanted to let me get it published. It wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked because I wanted to change a whole bunch of things. You know, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, that's why when somebody comes into the meeting and they're GSR or they're DCM or whatever they are, and they go, well, they want to change this, and you know, I like this right here. I'm an alcoholic. I don't like changes in my life, but I'm an AA panhandler. I like changes in my life in the program. But right here, Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience. It doesn't say people. You know, and that's they haven't changed it to people in the well, they did in the new edition, from what I understand. But you know, I'm just old school. I was brought up on the second and third edition of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And some of the old guys even brought in the first edition when they go to the book studies. You know, and there's a little bit of difference between the first and the third edition, because the first edition, at the end of the ABCs that we read tonight, it says, after ABCs, it says, if you are not thoroughly convinced at this point that you are at step 3, reread this book or else throw it away. You know, that was in the big book. And they probably wanted you to throw it away so they could charge you another $2.95 for another big book when you had to come back in and get a big book. You know, but this program only works if we work it. You know, so if you're new around here, you keep coming back. You get yourself a sponsor. Get yourself, I mean, these things are amazing. Because when I got sober in 1980, you wanted to call somebody, and then if you got 6 of the 7 numbers dialed and you screwed up or your finger slipped out, you had to hang up and redial again. Unless you were fancy and you had the Prince's phone, and then you go, you know, and punch out your 9 numbers on the Prince's phone. Yeah, I'm old. But I love life today. So if you're new, you know, you give this program a chance. It works, like I can't say it enough. It works if you work it, but it don't if you won't. Thank you all for showing up tonight, and thank you for making some fantastic spaghetti. And thank you for being here too, sir. And that's enough out of me. Saved you 4 minutes to share about the motorcycle run.
Thank you